Here, I don't know about you, but seeing a full stack of Starship again this week has been hugely exciting. There is a lot to cover today, including a bunch of interesting vehicle construction in the pipeline and amazing aerial views. The International Space Station crew rotation is always fun, with Crew Dragon performing its duties beautifully, Crew 5 settling in, with Crew 4 making their way back home. We had this amazing scene. Oh yes, this Intelsat launch was a fun one for a few reasons, and then we've got a lot more to dive into as well. Let's light this candle.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
So jumping right into Starship updates, and due to my deeper dive video being published last week, there are a few important points leading into this from the tail end of last week. Last Friday morning, just a little over a week ago, 2 Raptors were delivered to the launch site ahead of Booster 7's return to the pad. Only a few hours later, it was moved out of the wide bay. Now, it is easy to lose count of how many times Booster 7 has made this trip. Yep, it is a well-experienced booster, this one. Soon after, it carefully made its way into the launch site for what is hoped to be the last time. This follows the several-week stay that Booster 7 completed in the Mega Bay while it underwent the robustness upgrades. One of the main upgrades I was expecting to see was the complete installation of the blast shielding around the outer 20 Raptor engines. Obviously, that shielding has been missing for a long time, and as we can see right here, this shielding seems to be at the bottom of the priority list of things to install. Instead, the booster rolled out with what appears to be some kind of foil-like cover over the engines. I'm not entirely sure why SpaceX decided to leave it like this. Is it perhaps so that they can install the temporary Raptor chill piping that we've seen in the past before adding the final covers? Let me know what you think. After that 2-hour journey, Booster 7 arrived at the launch site and it was swiftly positioned between the 2 chopstick arms. They rose up to be secured onto the upper load points. This was all a great sign pointing towards a lift of Booster 7 onto the orbital launch mount that day. The road was even closed at the time, but this event instead was postponed until Monday. Speaking of the orbital launch mount though, the team continued to perform a load of upgrades, followed by testing it to prepare it for further action, hopefully leading up to a 33 engine static fire and an eventual orbital launch. Now, one of these tests is making use of this special jig, which is used to properly calibrate all 20 hold down clamps. In fact, SpaceX have been removing and installing a bunch of them. These images from Starship Gazer shows very nicely what the plan was with the clamp removal. To wrap things up, a full retraction test with all clamps was performed, and listen to that solid slam. A retraction like this is required for the booster to lift off once the engine ignition systems are all go to fly. So yes, Monday of course, SpaceX lifted Booster 7 onto the orbital launch mount. First in this process is the engagement of the pins on the transport stand, followed by the quick disconnect arm swinging back. Once Booster 7 was lifted far enough out of the transport stand, the pins disengaged. Up it slowly rose and swung over the mount where it was gently lowered in. Always very cool to see. These positioning pins on the orbital launch mount rise up and grab on to help position it. After being fully secured, the chopsticks lowered, and there we had it. If you look very carefully below the orbital launch mount, you can also see a Raptor engine here. The teams rolled that in below and installed it, finally completing the full set of 33 Raptor 2 engines again. Now, soon after this lift finished, the team was also seen preparing to move Ship 24 over to the staging area. We were, it seemed, finally about to see a full stack. The self-propelled modular transporters moved under, lifted it, and moved the vehicle between the tower arms. Early in the morning on Tuesday, they closed in, and we could see slight movement indicating a potential lift. There was a problem though. At first, it wasn't clear what was happening, but soon our questions were answered. These cushioning blocks installed quite a few weeks back, we believe are here to help protect the heat shield tiles on the Starship from being crushed by the arms. It looked to have been a little too large though, which meant that the upper load points most likely couldn't fully engage. At least though, we got some entertaining views of the blocks being removed. After a few hours, SpaceX prepared for the lift. The arms once again closed in around the ship, the pins on the chopstick arms latched into place, and it was airborne just before 7 p.m. that evening. Just an hour later, there it was, Ship 24 on top of Booster 7 on the orbital launch mount. Believe it or not, this is actually the very first time that these vehicles have been fully stacked together. The last full stack was way back in March of this year, Ship 20 and Booster 4, so it has taken a lot of time to get back to this point. Obviously, I think we can all say that we were expecting a full stack to occur again well before this. The Booster 7 explosion with the spin prime test months ago definitely set back things a lot more than I would have thought. Looking at it from the bright side though, it really did kick off a big range of updates to the orbital launch mount and the booster itself. Okay, so we also have some fun new vehicle production as well. Recently, Ship 26's nose cone rolled into the high bay to be stacked onto its nose cone barrel. After welding, it was then moved to the mid bay. With Ship 26's stacking now underway, we are getting ever closer to seeing this very bare Starship take shape. Bare, of course, because it lacks the regular flaps, heat shield and payload system. These three parts of the construction line can take an enormous amount of time and effort. Not having to include all of this would hugely reduce the cost of the vehicle, as well as improve the construction output. As Musk said a long time ago, the best part is no part. If it weighs nothing, it costs nothing, and it can't go wrong, right? Well, anyway, as we know now, these we think are just expendable test vehicles to allow flight while continuing to evolve the full Starship design, especially areas like the architecture of the payload bay door. Ship 26's common dome section was also moved into the high bay, and the double lift process was once again carried out to stack these two sections. The common dome was lifted up by the bridge crane to allow the middle liquid oxygen section to be attached below. Really nice that SpaceX now lifts both sections together and then places them onto the turntable to be welded this way. As expected, Ship 28's Starlink Pez dispenser was lifted inside the payload bay. Nice progress there. Teams were also seen taking apart the can crusher assembly with the ship aft skirt section, so testing must have been wrapped up here at this point. They've also rolled out this ship skirt, which was later stacked onto Booster 6. Remember that tank? Yeah, it's been moving about doing not much for at least the past 6 months, so it's nice to see some activity finally happening. Booster 9 also got all of its grid fins this week too, indicating that the final stack of this booster is imminent. That does make me slightly worried about Booster 8, which has had barely any attention since its move to the launch site. So yes, huge activity at Starbase Texas, but we also have some great updates at the Florida sites, with Greg Scott and Fariel taking to the skies again. At Launch Complex 39A, what is thought to be the water deluge manifold we can see here. This was previously lifted to be placed into the big hexagonal moat made around the orbital launch mount legs. This manifold is buried quite deep underground, so that the estimated 192 nozzles are flush with the pad. These will flood the area as water is ejected to flow under the booster. Over close to the big LR11 350 crane, we can see multiple things staged and ready to be used. One example is the drawworks ready to be assembled into the tower. Another thing that we've seen before at Starbase in Texas is a pile of red blocks which will support the assembly of the chopsticks here. This indicates that they are very nearly done getting these ready to finally install. Over at the Falcon area, we can see that the transporter erector is currently being converted to support the upcoming USS F-44 mission. And yes, this will be a Falcon heavy launch. I for one am so excited to see one of these beasts fly again after all this time. Over at Starbase Florida at Roberts Road, we can see that SpaceX has fully finished setting up the asphalt parking lot near Hangar X. They are now ready to support a lot more crew working here, I assume, both for working on the Falcon facility and the soon up and running Starship facility. Speaking of that, we can see that the teams really haven't wasted any time at all setting up the new tower segments for a third tower. The first segment has all sorts of main construction finished, and the second segment has already got 3 columns vertical. Right here, the main columns for the third segment are all ready to go as well, with the assembly stand close by. I'm thinking that perhaps these tower segments are being assembled simply as a spare for now. We haven't spotted any tower base being built yet, so awaiting more evidence to see where this may end up. What I can see here though is the stopper for the arms, indicating that this tower too will have chopsticks installed. That is really exciting. Over near the arms for the already assembled tower, we can see that they have now properly been decked out with the gas springs. We are almost there with these, but the one thing missing is the lower stabilisation arms. I'm thinking that these will be added only after the entire assembly has been mounted on the launch tower, as they stick out quite a bit. Over at the Star Factory, we can see through the doorway here that the first segment is also getting its complete concrete foundation. The progress is coming along very nicely, with the foundation work nearly complete for the last section as well. This building continues to make huge strides in no time at all, but then on the flip side, the high bay here hasn't really had too much work done over the past few weeks. Both cranes are ready to assemble everything it seems, so perhaps they're still awaiting some approvals to come through. Just up here, once again, we can see the very long SPMT, which, as I mentioned previously, is indeed used to transport Falcon 9 first stages to and from Hangar X. The amazing NASA spaceflight livestream caught that in action just recently. So thanks a heap to all of you for supporting Greg on Patreon there to help with the cost of those flights. That helps a great deal. Thanks also to all of you for the wonderful comments on the artificial gravity video that I published last week. It's really awesome to see all of the new subscribers catching up on this one. Do check that out if you missed it. There's a lot of really interesting information in that one, so a link is in the description below. Now, this week we got some pretty darn unique views from SpaceX's Intelsat Galaxy-33 and 34 satellite mission launched from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Saturday evening. Just look at this. Yep, I'll come back to the amazing aftermath of that in a second, but there were also a few other notable points for this brilliant flight. First, this was the 14th launch and landing of this booster number 1060, which makes it now the equal reuse leader with booster 1058. 10 of those flights were for Starlink alone, so it's a very well-loved beast, this one. Now, we don't hear of SpaceX launching Intelsat payloads often, do we? Well, that is because typically they are hurled into orbit by a Soyuz, a Proton, or an Ariane space rocket. In fact, we hadn't seen an Intelsat mission by SpaceX since 2017. I mean, that wasn't even with a Block 5. This was a Block 4, I think, and this was an expended mission like quite a few were at the time. It's funny how things change. We haven't seen an expended booster, or a lost booster for that matter, since the start of 2021, I'm fairly certain. Quite a good track record there that we've had since then. The time of day for this Intelsat launch was magic, of course, allowing the full sunlight in the upper atmosphere to illuminate the plume exhaust. You can see how bright that view was from the main engine cutoff and stage separation shot there. And just look at this scene from the fairing separation. That is the first stage here, and there go the two fairings, which was their 5th flight as stated in this live stream. The most exciting thing though was the full footage shared by SpaceX on Twitter with that camera shot from the drone ship A Shortfall of Gravitas. Now, I don't even think that this was particularly intentional, as it is important for the ship to be oriented correctly with currents and wavefronts, but everything came together here to allow this amazing view. Just look at that second stage plume expand out. If we just rewind this, right here you can see the first stage separation. This is all second stage plume, and then here this is the booster re-entry burn. This is all a time lapse, of course, but just a few seconds later, bam, there it was on the deck. So after all of this was complete, a fairly long 45-second burn of the upper stage was needed for these satellites just after the 26-minute mark, then the payload deployment of the first, and the second a few minutes later. That was a really fun mission, I think you would agree, and these satellites will place themselves into their final geostationary orbit over time. Now, I just managed to squeeze this in too before clicking the render button. Just hours ago, SpaceX launched the Intelsat HOTBIRD 13F mission, a beautiful night launch with this booster, 1069, flying for the 3rd time. A really neat shot of the satellite there at fairing separation as well, and terrific uninterrupted views of its landing on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. This one did need another second stage burn to send it into its deployment orbit, and there we had satellite deployment as well. SpaceX there making it look too easy as always. Just yesterday afternoon, NASA and SpaceX safely returned the Crew 4 astronauts on board SpaceX's Crew Dragon, splashing down just before 5 p.m. on Friday. NASA astronauts Bob Hines, Jelle Lindgren and Jessica Watkins, along with Samantha Cristoforetti from the European Space Agency, spent 170 days in orbit, another incredibly smooth mission. This was of course all after the Crew 5 launch, which docked to the station last week to take over the duties. They will remain on the ISS until March of 2023, conducting all sorts of great research, advanced bioprinting, cardiovascular health and fluid behaviour research. Finally, we have some great news here for NASA's CAPSTONE satellite on the way to the moon. This little 25kg or 55-pound CubeSat is the pathfinder for the Gateway outpost, which is eventually destined for the same near rectilinear halo orbit. Weeks ago, there was of course a big problem with CAPSTONE after its engine burn on September the 8th. You may recall that the CubeSat went into a safe configuration mode and ended up in a bit of a tumble. With critical systems affected from power to communications, the team of amazing engineers here spent countless hours poring over data. The mission seemed to be teetering on failure, with the possibility of a wrong move rendering the craft completely unrecoverable, but the engineers worked out that it was likely one of the craft's 8 thrusters that had a leaky valve causing the spin. On October the 7th, yaw, pitch and roll commands were sent to CAPSTONE in the hopes of beginning to arrest the tumble, and it worked. A great victory. With its solar arrays and antennas now pointing in the correct direction, this biggest hurdle has been overcome, providing a better outlook with power, data transmissions, and for the mission itself in general. Now, they are not quite out of the woods yet. With more thrust corrections likely needed in the near future, they need to avoid it getting into another spin due to that valve issue. Despite all of these problems though, amazingly, CAPSTONE is still on track to arrive at its lunar orbit on the 13th of November. A bunch of other cool things to mention too this week, including another amazing image from the James Webb Space Telescope. More on that in a moment, but first a big thank you to Brilliant supporting today's video. Brilliant provides the best way to learn math, science and computer science interactively. Thousands of lessons with exclusive new content added every single month. With Brilliant, it is so simple to jump in. Just start with something like the Mathematical Fundamentals course and work your way up. That is what is so brilliant about Brilliant. They walk you through the basics and teach you through problem solving so that you've got a good understanding before you move up to the more difficult stuff. It almost feels like a game, except you are leveling up with STEM skills. Of course, being fully into rockets, I've just got to point out the new Real Engineering Partner course, diving right into the math behind hurling rockets into space. There was a lot of skepticism around the concepts by spin launch, so it's refreshing to dive into the numbers to understand more about this idea. After learning some essential rocket physics and material science, you will have real knowledge that can inform you if such ideas are dead on the ground or if they could perhaps turn into a billion-dollar shortcut to space. I recommend running over a little of the material in your topics of interest each day. Step by step, you will find it has a huge impact. To get started for free, visit brilliant.org/MarcusHouse or click the link in the description. The first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thank you, Brilliant. So yes, the gift that just keeps on giving. Time for some more recently posted composite images by the James Webb and Hubble Space Telescope research teams. Here we see combined data from Webb's NIRCam, which remember is sensitive to near-infrared light, and a couple of Hubble instruments that essentially see the same wavelengths that we do, but with a little extra ultraviolet light for good measure. Now, what is great about mixing the two datasets together is that we can see almost completely different points of view. Hubble provides a reference for us to see views of the universe that are natural for us to interpret, whereas Webb is able to enhance our perspective by showing us things in a way that would not normally be immediately apparent, even revealing things which would usually be occluded from our view entirely. In this example, we see the galaxy pair VV191. Now, I will point out that these two galaxies are not actively interacting with each other. The initial intrigue here is that we are able to use the light coming from the large elliptical galaxy on the left there to help highlight the effects of interstellar dust in the spiral galaxy in the foreground. Once more, we can see that a third never-seen-before galaxy has been caught photobombing this shot. Yep, the large elliptical galaxy is also acting like a colossal telescope with some gravitational lensing, allowing us to witness the incredibly distant galaxy. As a byproduct of this discovery, we're going to be able to get a better estimate of its overall mass. All of this helps, of course, provide a more accurate model of how the universe works. Also, a sweet update on the DART mission. NASA released further information midweek on the already successful mission that we watched play out a few weeks ago now. The target, of course, was Dimorphos, and after this impact, the world waited patiently to see if we were indeed able to alter its orbit around the much larger parent asteroid Didymos. Now, NASA would have considered it a success if they had changed its 11-hour and 55-minute orbit by 73 seconds or so. Well, they absolutely smashed that benchmark by more than 25 times because the data is in and the orbit has been lowered to a staggering 11 hours and 23 minutes. Yep, I think that we can call that a win. If you want to know a lot more about it, the full link is in the description below. And thank you so much for turning up week after week to support me, the team that work with me as an extension, and all of the photographers and 3D artists out there who help to keep each and every one of us up to date on what is going on in the space industry. If you are a new subscriber, a huge welcome to you. I don't take this incredible job lightly, and I want to share as much with you as I can. If you super love what we do, like the many already shown on the right here, please do consider becoming a patron. Without you incredible people, these videos just wouldn't be possible, especially the deeper dives like the artificial gravity one published last week. That is here in the bottom left, along with the other deep dive videos on the right there too. Thank you everyone for watching, liking, and just engaging with what we do. You are awesome. I'll see you in the next video.